Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a stack of sources here diving deep into the life and legacy of a figure often called the African Che Guevara, Thomas Sankara.
Right, a leader from Burkina Faso, which used to be called Upper Volta, and he really, really challenged the status quo in his time in office.
Which wasn't actually that long, was it? Like 3.5 years as president?
Exactly, just 3.5 years, but incredibly intense.
And our mission today, basically, is to pull out the most important knowledge, the key insights from all these sources. We want to get a handle on his vision, what he actually achieved.
The huge challenges he ran into, definitely. And, the impression he left behind, which is still felt today.
So to really get Sankara, I guess we have to start at the beginning. His early life.
Yeah, makes sense. He was born December 21st, 1949. Back then it was French Upper Volta. He was the third of 10 kids.
10 children, wow. And it's interesting that the sources say his parents actually wanted him to become a priest.
But he went for the military instead, which, the sources point out was a pretty popular move back then. There was a disliked president who'd been kicked out.
Right, so the army maybe looked like a positive force.
Perhaps. Plus, and this is key, it came with a full scholarship. That would have been, a huge factor.
Definitely. And there's that little detail about him loving music, playing the guitar. It adds a different sort of dimension to the later revolutionary image.
It does. But the really formative stuff seems to have happened outside the country early on, like his officer training in Madagascar. That was 1970. He was only 20.
Yeah, that sounds critical. The sources say he saw a popular uprising there, one that actually overthrew the government.
Imagine witnessing that at that age. And crucially, that's when he first really got into the writings of Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin. The sources really stress how much that influenced his politics from then on.
So you've got this, perfect storm, seeing revolution happen and digging into the theory behind it.
Exactly. And then, before he even went back home in 72, he was in France at a parachute academy. More exposure to left-wing ideas there, too.
It almost feels like those years were, I don't know, custom designed to shape his political views.
It certainly seems to have solidified things for him. So he goes back, continues his military career, and starts getting noticed. The sources mention a heroic performance in the 74 border war with Mali.
Which is fascinating because years later, he completely disowned that war.
Right.
Called it useless, unjust.
Right. It shows he wasn't static in his thinking, even as he was, climbing the ranks.
So he keeps rising. Becomes commander of a commando training center in 76.
And here's a really important detail the sources flag. 1976 is when he met Blaise Compaoré.
His future friend and, the man who would eventually lead the coup against him.
Yeah. Their paths were intertwined right from then. Anyway, Sankara was known as very eloquent, very dedicated. He got popular.
Which led to politics, basically. 1981, military government. He's made Minister of Information.
And bam, he immediately starts ruffling feathers. His style was just completely different. He biked to work, for one thing.
Instead of the usual motorcade.
Right. But more importantly, his approach to information. He didn't censor. He actually encouraged investigative journalism.
He told the media, even the state papers, just print what you find.
Pretty much, which predictably led to reports of government scandals coming out. You can imagine that didn't sit well with everyone.
No kidding. That kind of transparency, or maybe lack of control, would have created serious friction.
Definitely set him apart. So, things move fast. There's another coup. And then January 1983, he becomes prime minister.
Okay, now he's PM. This opens doors internationally.
Big time. The sources talk about him meeting people like Fidel Castro, Samora Machel from Mozambique.
Yeah.
Real revolutionary figures.
Which were just reinforced all his existing ideas, the anti-imperialism, the left-wing thinking.
Absolutely. Pushed him further down that path. But that path put him on a collision course with the president, Ouedraogo.
Because Sankara's anti-imperialist talk and his sheer popularity were becoming a threat.
That's how it looked. The tension just ramps up really quickly. He gets removed as prime minister, arrested.
But arresting him didn't stop things. It kind of backfired, didn't it? It angered younger officers.
Exactly. August 4th, 1983. His friend, Blaise Compaoré, leads a coup, frees Sankara. They set up the National Council of the Revolution, and Sankara is the president.
And the sources mention weapons came from Gaddafi in Libya.
Yeah. Gaddafi saw himself as backing a fellow revolutionary there.
Okay. So now he's President Sankara. And this is where it really kicks off, right? The transformation project.
He didn't just want to govern. He wanted to remake the country. Symbolically first. Changed the name Upper Volta because it was Burkina Faso. Land of the upright.
New flag, new anthem, too.
Yeah.
A total reset of national identity.
Mm-hmm. And then came the policies and the achievements. The sheer speed and scale is, well, it's pretty staggering when you look at the sources.
Let's dive into those. Health, for instance.
Okay, get this. They vaccinated 2.5 million children against meningitis, yellow fever, measles, 2.5 million kids.
Wow.
In just a few weeks. That's incredible logistics for any country, let alone Burkina Faso back then.
Shows an immediate focus on, basic well-being. What about education?
Similar story. Nationwide literacy campaign. The literacy rate, it was about 13% when he took over in 83.
Pretty low.
Yeah. By 1987, it was reportedly 73%.
73% in 3.5 years.
An absolutely massive jump, speaks to a huge national mobilization.
And the environment, too. Planting trees.
Over 10 million trees planted to fight desertification, the encroaching Sahara. So long-term thinking there as well.
Okay, another area the sources really highlight is women's rights. He seems to have been way ahead of the curve there.
Definitely. One of the first African leaders doing this stuff. Appointing women to high government posts, actively encouraging them into jobs usually held by men, even recruited women into the army.
And tackling social issues head on.
Yeah, outlawing female genital mutilation, forced marriages, polygamy. The sources are clear. This was not common at the time. He was really pushing boundaries.
He also went hard against corruption and government luxury.
Oh, yeah. Sold off the fleet of government Mercedes, made the Renault 5 a really basic car, the official car for ministers.
Symbolic, but also practical savings, I guess.
And he cut salaries for public servants, banned chauffeurs, first-class flights. He was trying to dismantle that whole idea of government service being a way to get rich.
And he walked the talk, right. The sources mention his own lifestyle.
Lived on something like 462 carbers a month. His declared assets were tiny. A basic car, a fridge, bikes, his guitars. He wasn't preaching austerity while living it up.
That must have given his anti-corruption message a lot of weight.
No doubt. Then there was land reform. Huge policy. Redistributing land from feudal landlords to the peasants.
And that wasn't just about fairness. It boosted the economy.
Massively, according to the sources. Agricultural production apparently soared, doubled the yield per hectare in 3 years.
From 1,700 kilograms to 3,800 kilograms per hectare.
Yeah, something like that. And the result, Burkina Faso became self-sufficient in food. That's a fundamental change.
And that ties into his whole stance on foreign aid, doesn't it?
Absolutely. He believed Burkina Faso could stand on its own feet. He famously refused IMF aid packages.
Said they came with strings attached.
Mm-hmm. His line was, "The one who feeds you usually imposes his will upon you." He saw aid as a tool of control.
And he took that challenge wider, trying to get other African nations to refuse debt payments.
Yeah, he argued they shouldn't pay debts to former colonizers. The sources say this caused, quote, high levels of contamination from some very powerful people.
You can see why. Directly challenging the global financial order, challenging France. That's going to make enemies.
Powerful enemies, yes. So you have this period of intense, rapid change, lots of progress on many fronts. But by 1987, things were getting difficult.
Yeah. The sources also talk about the other side. Problems were emerging.
Right. Despite the progress, there were reports of human rights abuses starting to surface. Cases of torture, detention, other violations.
The sources suggest his revolutionary zeal maybe went too far, targeting people seen as enemies.
That's the interpretation offered, yeah. That some elements of society were allegedly targeted and persecuted as enemies of the revolution. It's a really difficult aspect.
How did that connect to his policies? Like the anti-corruption drive?
Well, he set up these public tribunals. They tried nearly 1,000 officials and civil servants for corruption.
For misusing funds, theft, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But while the aim was good, fighting corruption, apparently many people lost their jobs. And the sources say plenty without just cause.
Which would have created a lot of resentment, especially among the elite.
Precisely. So you've got this growing internal opposition from people who felt wronged or lost power, plus the external pressure from countries like France and Ivory Coast who were unsettled by his radicalism.
The pressure cooker effect, kind of, building inside and out.
And internally, things were getting tense, even at the very top. Sankara reportedly suspected his close ally, Compaoré, might be plotting against him.
Why? Had Compaoré lost faith, or did he just see an opportunity?
Sources suggest maybe Compaoré had lost faith in the revolution, or perhaps other motives were at play. It's hard to know for sure.
But all this tension, The internal suspicion, the external pressure, it led to that tragic day, October 15th, 1987.
Yeah. Sankara was killed, along with 12 other officials, in a coup organized by Blaise Compaoré.
He was only 37. And the sources describe a brutal end body, dismembered, quickly buried. His wife and kids had to flee.
It was a violent end to that whole revolutionary chapter, and Compaoré immediately started rolling things back.
Reversed pretty much everything Sankara did.
Almost entirely. Overturned the nationalizations, rejoined the IMF and World Bank, basically put Burkina Faso back into the systems Sankara had tried to break away from.
And Compaoré stayed for, 27 years?
Yeah, until he himself was overthrown by protests in 2014. A really stark contrast to Sankara's brief, intense period.
Yet, Sankara's legacy, it seems much bigger than those 3.5 years. Still talked about today, right? Across Africa.
Oh, absolutely. People look back, and authors cited in our sources emphasize how visionary he was on certain things, especially women's rights, putting women in cabinet, pushing those social reforms when it was so unusual.
And I guess that core idea of a leader focused on the people's lives, on self-reliance.
Versus leaders maybe seen as being in it for themselves or their family or their group. That contrast is powerful. It's a big part of why he's still remembered, still admired by many.
He was pushing for a fundamentally different kind of leadership, it seems.
That was the project, yeah.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, looking at the sources, it's a complex picture. You have this leader, Sankara, with a radical vision, achieving truly amazing things incredibly quickly. Health, education, environment, women's rights, fighting corruption, food self-sufficiency.
Huge changes. But the sources also show the other side. The criticisms, the reports of human rights abuses, the methods used, the opposition he generated. That tension is right there in the material.
It really is. Which leaves us and leaves you with something to think about. What really stands out to you from Sankara's story after hearing this? How do you weigh that rapid transformative progress against those reports of rights abuses? Or maybe think about this. Given how radically he challenged established powers, both local and international, was that violent end almost inevitable? Could things have gone differently for him and for Burkina Faso? Lots to mull over there.